Okay team, welcome back to another tip of the week. This time what we're going to do as sort of a companion to the going from CAD to Photoshop, I'm going to cover a couple of basic and easy little tricks to make your life more simple when it comes to the workflow from CAD to Illustrator. Now, I typically do most of my illustrative plans in Photoshop. I'll kind of talk about a couple of reasons as I'm working on this one. I just find it's a little easier to make edits in Photoshop than in Illustrator, especially when you're doing it time after time after time in the office. But there is something nice to a very simple Illustrator plan. We're going to be using this old plan of mine as an example. I thought this was a good one because I have noticed some of the disjointed lines you get sometimes when you export from AutoCAD to a PDF, most specifically around where there's arcs or semi-complex polylines. So what do I mean by that? First, let's just open up this last print that I did of this project in Illustrator so we can kind of see what that looks like. Again, if you're not familiar how to set up an Illustrator file, I know typically you probably just open that PDF up directly. I'm going to show you a slightly different technique so we can illustrate the PDF relatively quickly, then go back and replace our PDF, so if we ever have changes, we can make quick edits. I know that that sheet that we had is a 24 by 36, so I'm just going to change this real quick. 36, 24, orientation's fine, rest of this is good, so I'm going to hit create. And instead of opening the PDF or importing it, what I'm going to do is show you how to place a PDF, because we're going to eventually be doing this at the end when we have all of our zones colored. So what you do, go to File, Place, find where you have it saved. I just saved one on my desktop. Do not save things on your desktop. I'm just doing that for the example. I'm going to hit Place. It's going to ask me where I want to put it. Actually, let's undo that. Let's do it one more time because I want to show you one other little dialogue. So let's do Place. Let's hit Show Import Options down here. Because there's one thing you want to make sure you do is that this is set to crop to media rather than bounding box. Now, the difference between that is if it's media, it's going to open up this PDF as if it's reading the entire sheet, where bounding box will find line work and crop that placement to those edges. It's a very small difference. In most cases, if you have a border, it's not a big deal, but it's a good habit to get into. So I'm going to hit media. That's okay. Rest of this is fine. Just going to put that here. Let's just move it. Let's turn our guides on. Okay, that should be on. Why is it not snapping for me? There we go. Okay, so now that we've got that centered, that looks good. So the reason for doing this is I'm going to show you here a quick example, because what we're going to want to do in here first, actually, let's look. So now that we've got that centered, let's look at what I was talking about. So you can see a couple of those disjointed curves in here, kind of where they meet straight lines. It can be a bit annoying if you want a nice, clean, connected line. Unfortunately, there's just some drawbacks. We're going to look at a different way that we can export as well. But this is kind of what we're focusing on trying to fix, or at least minimize as much as we can. And then just some quick methods on how to fill this up with some color. So first thing we're going to do before we import this, because we will be importing this, I'm just going to show you what happens when we make a change in here. One of the things we're going to want to do is we're actually going to want to turn off all of our annotation to start with. So I just want to show this as a quick example. Go back to my layout. So all I did was I turned off some of the annotation. I'm going to reprint. It's important that you save over your original one. So yes. Okay, let's close this. Back to Illustrator. This is the pop-up we get. There are some files missing, modify, blah, blah, blah. Would you like to update them? We do. So now what happened is those annotations are gone, but my drawing is still in place from where it needs to be. This is the process that I typically use. I will go back in and actually fill in. If I'm working in Illustrator, I will just draw over the lines. I'll snap to what I can. But otherwise, that's kind of why I work in Photoshop more, because it's easier to kind of use the selection wand to fill up certain areas. What we can't do in here is actively, if we've placed it, I can't select any of this individual line work. It's all embedded. Not embedded, linked. Those are different ways of importing your stuff. So if I go in here, it's just one object in my layer. It's the linked PDF. Unfortunately, if you're just going to draw over this, make sure you've got this layer as one. Add another layer on, not on top, below, and lock this one. And then you can just draw all over this with, you know, fill this in with lawn and paver tones and all of that kind of stuff. Obviously, that might take a bit longer depending on how complex your drawing is. So let's look at a different technique so we can actually use live paint to fill in a lot of these zones. Now to do that, we actually need to kind of set up our drawing in AutoCAD. Again, I hawk on this all the time, but the more effort you put into your CAD drawing, the less work you have later on. So first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to bring back that annotation. I'm going to go to my layer properties real quick and just make, so I'm going to make a quick layer states. So just hit this button up here. I'm going to save a new one as print, because this is what I want to print as. Hit OK. We'll come back to this. So I'm going to hit close. And then I'm going to go through and turn off or freeze all this text items. Some of these are XREF, so I need to do it this way. I think most of that's gone. That's fine. These are on symbol, so I need to turn that off. Also use a layer called AnnoSim. There we go. Let's turn all this off. That's fine. So now I pretty much have a drawing, no text. The reason I'm taking the text out is when you go to use live paint, it's going to read every single bit of line work and text and fill in around it. We're going to eventually replace, as in using place, our PDF on top of everything once we're done. So I'm going to go back in here. Let's go back to our layout. Don't worry that everything's not turned on. Actually, let's do one last thing. I'm going to go to layer properties. I'm going to click into my model space, layer properties, go to my XREF, and actually find my property line, which is probably this one, rec. This is a typical sort of thing you'll see on a survey. This one right here. And I'm going to change the line type and my VP to solid. The reason I'm doing that will become apparent as we go to fill in our drawing. We eventually need a solid border on the outside. We're going to have to get rid of clipping planes. That'll be essentially the model view window, but we need to do that so we can make this PDF a live trace. And then one last thing before we print this, I'm going to go into my page setup. Hit modify. Now there's this weird thing that sometimes some of those disjointed lines can be fixed or at least look a little bit tighter. I almost exclusively always print DWG to PDF. The reason for doing that is if you ever need to send this file to somebody, so you e-transmit it, not everybody has these printer setups. Adobe, Bluebeam, there's a bunch of different printer drivers that come with different software. Everybody who has CAD has this DWG to PDF. I want them to be able to open it up. It's going to come with all the XREFs. It's going to come with my plot styles, all of that. So I want them to be able to just print if they receive a file from me. Now in this case, we can always switch back. But I'm going to switch this to Adobe PDF. For some reason, that handles those disjointed lines a little bit better. And one last thing to do, I'm going to do a select similar and make sure that some of these are joined. So some of these can't be joined. So let's see what's going on. My guess is that all of these are at slightly different elevations. These are just my contour lines. So I'm just going to select all of them. Go to properties. I can see they probably, because I snapped to the existing contour lines and those had an elevation. I'm just going to change these all to 0. I'm not going to be putting this in 3D anyway, so it's all fine. And then hit join again. Let's make sure we've got as many of these things. This looks similar. Join. Okay, so I think we should be, I think I got an extra line in there. Let's get rid of that one. Yeah, all of these look fine. So having those joined, this one's a bit off still. Okay, so I'm not going to fuss over those too much. I just want to show you the differences we get if we do that. We're still most likely going to have a couple of offsets, but some of them will look a lot better. So I'm going to go layout, print, hit OK. I think it wants us to save over because we're using a different driver. I'm going to hit save. Yes. Okay, so that's done. The Adobe driver is noticeably slower to print out, but this is already showing up. Some files are missing, so if I hit this, this should update. I also have a feeling that this is going to rotate, just because the Adobe PDF, for some reason, they tend to, if you just switch them, they tend to export at a 90-degree angle. Yep, see, just like this is coming up. Not a big deal. We'll just rotate it in Illustrator. There's a way I can cover in another video in the future on how to just fix this if you like using the Adobe PDF driver. Okay, so let's just close this. I'll hit replace. I think the way that it's reading this is a bit different. That's fine. Yep, so this came and rotated as well. I'm just going to rotate this guy around 90 degrees, so that's fine. Let's take a quick look at some of those disjointed pieces. So this is looking a lot better. That's looking a lot better. This one down here looks better. So you get just some better results with the Adobe driver. Yeah, see, even all of those are connected, so that's looking really good. So now that we've got that, again, this is a tool we're going to come back to. We're going to stick with the Adobe PDF driver. What I'm going to do is start a new file as if you were starting from scratch. So same, actually, let's just open it. File, open. We're calling this one Peterson. Again, this is coming in rotated. I'm not going to worry about it too much. I'll just flip this real quick. Again, we'll cover how to make that change on a different video. I don't want to get too bogged down in AutoCAD stuff. So let's just rotate this 90. Okay, that's good. So now we have all of our line work in here. Not that much different from what we previously had, right? One thing to notice is that I changed that property line. We're going to change it back when we do our final export, but I changed that to solid. The reason we want to do that is when we get to our live trace, we want a nice border, solid line border all the way around the outside. There'll still be some little points we have to kind of fill in, but that should save us some headache. So next thing I'm going to do, we need to get rid of all the clipping paths. What a clipping path is essentially like a mask. If you're familiar with masks in Photoshop, it is stopping. It's preventing us seeing any more of the drawing going below this kind of hidden line. So if I actually use my direct selection, select what would be my model view window, but I always have that invisible, or so it doesn't print the line itself. So I just need to know where it is. Go to select same appearance. That's going to select all my clipping paths, and I need to get rid of those. So I'm going to delete those. So now you can see we've got some line work that's kind of going into what would be our title block. Don't worry about that now. Again, we're going to be replacing this layer eventually, so I'm not overly worried about it. Next thing we need to do, we should be able to make this a live paint object now. So go over, you might have it on Shape Builder, live paint bucket tool. We want to select all of this. And when I hover over, it's asking me if I want to create this into a live paint. And now I believe it's done. I can, for example, these are steps. Let's make our steps light and our caps a little darker. I can just start filling these in. So very handy. This is just like the magic wand selection tool or the fill in Photoshop. So I can just go around, let's say, let's change. Our caps can be a bit darker. So I can start filling all of this in. Again, you might run in some places where you have little gaps or enough line work covering it that you have to select on both sides. Let's see if I've got any of those around here. Doesn't look like it. Actually, we'll probably see some of that in the lawn. So let's say we want to do the lawn piece. Just going to use this sort of light green. So it's finding the solid border around. It's skipping over all of these dashed lines, and it's finding the edges of those contours until it hits another solid line, which is the house over here. But I can click on that, and I'll just start filling in. Again, there's little bits you might have to go in and kind of make sure you don't miss, but this can be very fast. Now, the reason I made our property line a solid border is I wanted to be able to also just add to the front. And if that line is not solid, it's going to go over it. So there's a couple of other little areas that I would want to clean up, but otherwise, this sort of quick fill, I mean, you're just selecting colors, you're clicking inside certain areas, it's pretty fast. So now, once you have this all filled up and looking with all the tones and colors and you didn't miss any gaps or anything like that, you can go in and delete, like get rid of all of this black line work. It's a bit of a pain. You kind of got to go around and select things individually. Really, I don't think that's worth, unless you need to have this drawing be as absolutely clean as possible. Realistically, if you're going to make any more changes to this, you're going to have to start over with the live paint group, which again, it's not why I really like to use it. But once you're done, remember at any point you can do Control-0, that sort of centers your drawing. So we're going to make layer 2 active. And all I'm going to do is go back to that place. Actually, let's do this. We're going to place. But first, what I want to do is turn on all of my items again. So I'm going to go back to my layer properties, layer states, go to print, back to layout. Should have all my annotation. Let's make sure our xref override on our line type. Let's see, we need to go back in here. xref, let's find that. No, we need to just change it back to this phantom line. That's okay. So now that's back to dashed. Okay, so, okay, we've got all of our annotation back where we need it. I took this out so you guys don't see the information. I'm gonna hit print. We're all good here, 24 by 36, that looks good. Hit okay. I'm gonna save over this previous one. Hit yes. Go back into Illustrator. This is going to say some files are modified. It's actually talking about the ones from the first drawing. Let's make sure we save this with, I always like to put like a -A, so I know that that's the separate file. And let's save this as an Illustrator file right off the bat. Save. That's all fine. Okay, so we know that this one updated, showing all of that. So if we come back here, center our drawing again, just like we did before, place, make sure on that upper layer, save over the, or select this one. Let's just double check we've got our import options on there. We want media, that's good, hit okay. Edit with the rotation, and let's get that centered in there. Okay, so now what we've got is we've got layer 1. We can retitle all of this. This is our live paint group, so if we need to go back in and maybe make some changes, we can turn this one off. This still has our core line work, so if you do need to replace that line work, that's where it's a bit of a headache. That's why I think it's better to work in Photoshop. It's a little easier to do this part. But if it's just things like annotations, you need to add some more labels, you now have this linked group on top. So unless you change your line work in here, you can add all the annotation you need to put in here. You can change dates in your title block, anything like that. And this kind of all shows up down here as we have it. One last thing you might have to do, because we lost that clipping plane, you can either add another clipping plane. A quick workaround, since we've got all of our annotation on top of that, just throw in a quick white box in between those two layers. Just like that. Blocks everything out that's below. And if you need to block anything else down here, I don't think we really need to. Maybe we just cut this off over here, that's fine. So we've got that clipped off. There might be a couple of things you want to come in here. Let's make sure we've locked these two. I need to get rid of like that property line. You can always use your direct selection. All you're doing is you're getting rid of the solid one from the live paint group that we made. And then that stays nice and cleaned up. So again, it's a bit of give and take in here as far as how clean this line work ends up being, how much extra work you need to do. But I think live trace is pretty great to kind of go in here and fill things in. Again, it's just the line work gets a little bit messy, so you're gonna have to work around it. But again, you can come in, work around this, play with this as much as you want. Always put your drawing back on top. That way you've got all your annotation objects on top and you don't really have to worry about that solid line being on the outside.